Think about living in a world where the man who experimented on children, who sent thousands to their deaths with the wave of his hand, was never punished. Imagine knowing he escaped the courtroom and instead spent decades living freely, always one step ahead of justice. That man was Josef Mengele, the angel of death of Auschwitz. And while his victims never forgot him, Mengele's own last years were not spent in triumph. They were spent in terror, running, hiding, and finally dying in a way as pitiful as it was terrifying. At Auschwitz, Mengele became infamous. On the selection ramps, prisoners froze when they saw his white-gloved hand. A flick to the left meant forced labor. A flick to the right meant the gas chamber. Mothers were separated from children. Twins were seized for grotesque medical experiments. He injected dyes into eyes to try to change their color. He mutilated children in the name of science. He carried out experiments that left victims screaming in agony. Survivors remembered his smile, cold, detached, as he sent thousands to their deaths. When Auschwitz was liberated in 1945, the world learned of his crimes, but Mengele himself had already vanished into the chaos. After the collapse of the Third Reich, Mengele disguised himself as a regular soldier and blended into the flood of captured men. Detained briefly by US troops, he gave a false name and was released. The Allies hadn't yet realized how important he was. The full scale of his crimes was still being uncovered. That single slip allowed the Angel of Death to disappear. While leading Nazis like Göring and Himmler were captured or killed, Mengele quietly walked away. With the help of Nazi sympathizers and his family's fortune, Mengele secured false papers and fled Germany. In 1949, under the identity of Helmut Gregor, he boarded a ship to Argentina. There, among a growing community of Nazi exiles, he lived in comfort. He worked openly, ran businesses, and even attended social gatherings. But freedom was never absolute. He knew Nazi hunters and survivors wanted him. Every knock on the door, every glance from a stranger, could mean capture. Josef Mengele had escaped the trial that should have exposed him to the world, but he hadn't escaped fear, and in the years ahead, that fear would consume him until the day he died. By the 1950s, Josef Mengele was living in South America under false names, blending into German expatriate communities in Argentina and Paraguay. On the surface, he was free, but freedom was poisoned by fear. He was now the most wanted Nazi on Earth, hunted by survivors, Nazi hunters, and intelligence services. While men like Hermann Göring and Rudolf Hess had faced trial at Nuremberg, Mengele had slipped away. To many Holocaust survivors, that injustice was unbearable. Every year he remained free was another year of stolen justice, and he knew it. At first, Mengele lived comfortably in Buenos Aires. He worked as a businessman, attended gatherings, and even bragged in private circles about Auschwitz, but his arrogance faded quickly. In 1960, Israeli Mossad agents captured Adolf Eichmann in Argentina, and suddenly the Angel of Death panicked. He fled immediately, leaving his life behind, convinced he was next. Eichmann's execution in 1962 only deepened his paranoia. From then on, Mengele lived like a fugitive in the shadows. He moved between Paraguay and Brazil, switching safe houses, relying on ex-Nazis and sympathizers for protection. He used false names like Jose Mengele or Wolfgang Gerhardt. Every new neighbor, every unfamiliar face could be an informant. Freedom became a prison. He wrote in letters that he feared betrayal constantly. He refused to sleep in the same house for long, avoided doctors, and rarely stayed in one place. Even his allies began to notice his paranoia. He checked logs obsessively, refused to be photographed, and panicked whenever newspapers mentioned Nazi trials. To the world, he was a ghost. To himself, he was a man haunted by every shadow. As the years passed, Mengele grew bitter. He raged that he had given his life to science, but was treated like a criminal. His self-pity was grotesque. Never remorse, only resentment at being hunted. Survivors remembered him for torture. He remembered himself as a victim. By the 1970s, time was catching up with him. He suffered from high blood pressure, strokes, and joint pain, yet he refused medical help, terrified of exposure. Old age turned his exile into misery. Once arrogant and smug, he now lived as a frail old man, constantly in hiding, increasingly dependent on sympathizers. He spent his final years in Brazil, staying with a family of German immigrants near Sao Paulo. The angel of death had escaped the gallows, but not punishment. His life was reduced to fear, paranoia, and sickness. Every knock at the door made him flinch. Every headline about Nazi hunters twisted the knife of dread. And then, in 1979, Josef Mengele's flight from justice ended, not with handcuffs, but with the ocean swallowing him whole. On February 7, 1979, Josef Mengele, once the feared angel of death of Auschwitz, was living under the name Wolfgang Gerhard with a sympathetic German-Brazilian family in Bertioga, near Sao Paulo. By then, he was 68 years old. His body was frail, his health failing, but even in exile, paranoia never left him. He rarely went out in public, convinced that Mossad agents or Nazi hunters were closing in. That afternoon, against his usual habits, he decided to swim at a nearby beach. To his protectors, it was shocking. Mengele rarely appeared in the open, and when he did, he carried the same nervousness that had haunted him for decades. Witnesses later described the scene. Mengele waded into the Atlantic surf, his figure bent and weak, fighting against the waves. In the water, he suddenly suffered a stroke. Without strength to resist, he was pulled under. His body thrashed briefly, then disappeared beneath the surface. The man who once decided life and death with the flick of a hand now drowned helplessly in the waves. No trial, no judge, no jury, just the sea swallowing him whole. His death was not heroic. It was not dignified. It was in every sense terrifying. An old man's body giving out while his mind was still haunted by the shadows of the past. His protectors buried him quickly in a cemetery near Sao Paulo under the false name Wolfgang Gerhard. They told no one the truth. For years the world continued to believe that Mengele was alive, hiding somewhere in South America. His name appeared on most wanted lists. Nazi hunters swore they were close, and survivors of Auschwitz still dreamed of the day he would be dragged before a judge. But Mengele was already in the ground, his grave disguised, his death hidden. In 1985, acting on tips, investigators exhumed a grave in Brazil. Forensic experts concluded the skeleton belonged to Mengele, but doubts lingered. It wasn't until 1992, with DNA testing, that the world had certainty the angel of death had indeed drowned 13 years earlier. The revelation stunned survivors. For decades they had imagined him alive, feared him in nightmares, and hoped for a trial that never came. Learning he had died quietly, free, protected, and hidden, felt like a second injustice. Josef Mengele never faced justice. He never heard the verdict of his victims or felt the weight of a courtroom. But his last years, spent in paranoia, sickness, and hiding, were their own prison. He lived in fear, and he died in fear. In the end, the angel of death was reduced to a frail old man, swallowed by the waves, his body rotting under a false name until science exposed him. His legacy is not only the horror of his crimes, but also the pitiful image of a man who ran from justice until the ocean finally caught him. What are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below. If you liked this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for the latest videos.